I'm pretty sure it was the dinner plate comment. You wanted to get credit for your plating, and I didn't give it to you. I didn't like your aesthetic. When I was in Austin, I compiled a series of proprietary business information. I was thinking specifically about what it would mean to employ people involved in gas and oil refining and or production, but specifically production at that point in time. See, I had already done a comparative analysis in terms of what would be the appropriate considerations regarding compensation for chemical engineers or other people involved with petroleum refining. This concept of trying to say you have a proprietary refining model that involves harvesting people through derivative processes while you leave them on the public doles. Very unsavory to me. I don't accept that. And not only do I not accept that, I understand that it's inconsistent with very, very high crimes. And while somebody may have tried to misrepresent that it's their culture, then what you're saying is that you have a culture of criminality. On the other hand, there's a variety of other things that can be done, including understanding that applying appropriate compensation in accordance with existing labor laws is actually more cost effective. See, I did a specific breakdown on what it meant to put people on shifts of, say, 10 consecutive days at 12 hours a day, and then to give them a week off, which is unfortunately a much more popular business model than should be. As a matter of fact, it's illegal. And I don't know why nobody in the United States or as part of the NAFTA, right, development paradigm did not prosecute it as such. Especially if you're dealing with ultrasonic technology, and especially if you have some sort of bipolar mall where you've got people engaged in industrial inspection and industrial production techniques, paired with people involved with psychiatric or other kinds of medical observation in a specific geographic dispersal pattern. That makes sense if you understand a little bit about sine waves, right? But from a perspective of labor and other kinds of cost considerations, does not. And so I made a sheet where I did a comparison of what it would mean to employ people in accordance with the law at an appropriate level of compensation versus this sort of staggered schedule that violates the law. And my theory was that what was happening is people in certain sectors were intentionally violating labor laws. And they had some other kind of accounting going on where they accounted for how much it would have cost if they had applied the appropriate law. And then they compared that with what their actual expenditures were. Because part of what they're getting away with is risk. The risk associated with engaging in illegal activity, starting with the basics of labor law, and then what other kinds of risk do you take to see what you could get away with? That might save cost or may give a kickback in the form of some kind of insurance or drawdown from a subsidized federal appropriations process under the auspices of some kind of emergency. So you cut corners here on applying appropriate labor law. You reduce wages, you stagger the schedules, you mess with people's capacity to be on the ball in the workplace because you've already got your derivatives economy hooked up with medical billings. You've already got your insurance providers in networks, and there's all of these shared board membership opportunities. So you can just waive cost here and there. And when you really need a very significant toxic dump, it just looks like somebody got sick and they needed medical treatment. And medical treatment is a human right. You would never say that somebody that's sick doesn't deserve to get treatment, would you? You'd have to find a way to make sure they got medical care because that's what it's about. They're sick. So then you do the analysis and you do the cost and you see, well, on one hand, it doesn't make sense from a labor cost paradigm to actually have these kind of schedules. But there's all these exigencies you have to account for. And there's all of these ways you can cross over different budgets. And if you can start getting away and accruing risk credit by shaving off labor cost or hiding it and diverting it somewhere, then what happens when you've got ammonium nitrate on site? What happens when you have radiological materials that require a certain kind of disposal? What happens if you have somebody involved in industrial technologies that has been contracted or works through a proprietary process to come out and do a required inspection of a gas and oil pipeline and somebody steals their frigging camera? That's exactly the kind of gambling they've been doing. Just so you know, I would never request a non emergency repair or inspection on a weekend. In order to work on a weekend, you have to pay or at least budget for time and a half. There's no legitimate reason to have people come out on a weekend if you're anywhere near competent at keeping a schedule. Not only that, especially if you're dealing with some sort of repair to a fixed asset like a house or a company or a refining facility, much less something like a hospital, then you also have to understand that things could potentially go wrong. There might be a situation involving a problem, and ultimately, some repairs need to make adjustments for or in accordance with whatever the permitting is for that facility, and or be able to demonstrate compliance with timelines around inspections. What happens if you need to call up the city service or the certifier of the inspections? You can't do that on a weekend. And if you do that on a weekend, that's an emergency service call. That's also billed an additional amount. Anybody that would agree to take less or to shave it off, I'll do you a favor. That's illegal. Every single time you do something that you don't need to do because you're hooking up a side bit on it, it's illegal. It's also not very cost effective.